Welcome back. We are talking about web scraping, an introduction. Just a reminder that we are still in the part 1, the first file. We just finished talking about the difference between the internet and the World Wide Web. We also talked about how Python has some really interesting packages or libraries to access the web pages and other resources that's across the network. Okay, so we actually talked about HTTP. That's a protocol used by the World Wide Web. We talked about the internet. We talked about something called request response cycle in the last video. And I gave you an example at a very low level called socket that establishes a low level connection. Okay. But I told you that we don't need this sockets example for the exam. It's just for demonstration, but we did this. Now what we want to focus on in this class is start doing the actual coding with a much easier package that works at a higher level of abstraction. So with this, what Python helps us do is to kind of replicate what we might do on the browser. Send a request across the internet, but try to open, let's say as an example, web pages, okay, over the World Wide Web. But it doesn't have to be just web pages. It can be any other resource, okay? It could be a text file, it could be a video file, whatever it is that you want it to be. All right. So now let's get started with the code. So here is an example. Let me just copy this and paste this on the next page here, so we can focus on this. And so the most basic library that we need to know is called URLLib, right? This is provided by Python, and to be able to access this facility where I can ask for a web page across the network, we basically have to write this code that says from URLLib.request import URL open. Okay, it's somewhat like when we did before import random module, right? We did import specific things, import math package and so on. So it's kind of similar to this. You just need to follow this code. Just write from URLLib.request import URL open. What this means is that URLLib is the name of the package, request is a specific submodule, and this is even more specific than the request. So we're actually accessing a function from this submodule request that belongs to URLLib. Okay, the URLLib is the name of the main package. This is for Python 3. Python 2 would be slightly different. Okay, so now once you import the package, now we have the ability to open a web page. And for our purposes, what I did was that I created a very simple web page, because if you remember the sockets, we tried to open a web page called stackoverflow.com, and that was a very complex, long web page. We don't want that for demonstration purposes. So let me show you the page I created. Okay, very simple page. And I hope that before you came to this video, you either watched the video that I linked to in the previous video, right? So you know very basic HTML. How does HTML look, right? So if I go to view source, page source here on Chrome, right? You know what HTML tag means. You know what body tag means. You don't have to know div, but you do know what h1 is, what p is maybe, and ahref. This is what is popularly known as an anchor tag that basically refers to other links on a web page. It could be an external link, external to the web page. In this case, the example is baruch.cuny.edu, or it could be an internal link, internal to the web page. If I click on it, I'll go pytest /page2.html. Okay, so you have some basic understanding of HTML and the fact that HTML is a language that you use to format and display this content. Okay, so we know this. I'm assuming this. If you're not sure about this, then go back to the video that I linked to and have a look at very basic HTML. It should take you all of 15-20 minutes. Okay. Now that you know what basic HTML is, let's see what can we do with this particular package. Okay, so here it appears that I've imported a specific functionality, specifically URL open, right? And I'm basically writing in a code that says, here's a variable. For example, this could be HTML. I'm calling this variable HTML, but if I want, I can call it X. It doesn't matter. Okay, so let's call this X. This variable is equal to URL open Here's the name of the web page, and I want to print whatever that X is. We're going to find out what X is shortly. Okay. So again, this is similar to the web page on the browser that you type in. So let's see what happens. I'm going to run this code. So first thing you notice is it's not really the web page that's coming back. It's specific kind of an object, right? That this package is letting us create using this variable. Okay, so it's actually a specific kind of an object. So we cannot directly use it, but nevertheless we need this object to start our processing. Okay, so the first step we do is we do here is use this function URL open a specific page, assign it to a variable, any variable, call it anything you want, HTML, web page, X, right? That's actually an object that we can now manipulate. So now I'm going to ignore this for the time being. I'm going to come back to this in a second. Okay, let's just continue on what we were doing before, slightly before, a slightly longer version. Let's see if we can try to get us to do some useful things with this. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and I'm going to delete this cell. So again, we'll work in an uncluttered environment. Okay, I'm going to paste this new code. So again, the first line should be familiar to you. From URLLib.request import URL open. We are importing the functionality we need, okay, from a library from Python. And by the way, this is inbuilt in, I forgot to mention this, it's inbuilt in Anaconda. So you don't have to worry about, for Anaconda, you don't have to worry about installing this package. It's already installed for you. So you can work directly like this, okay, if you have Anaconda. If you don't, you've got to do something separately to import the package. Okay, but we shouldn't have a problem since we all use Anaconda, Jupyter Notebook, or Spider. Okay. All right. Now here's the variable. Again, previously I called it HTML X. Let's call it web page in this example. Okay, equal to URL open. So please help me open this web page, right? And we saw that this web page looks somewhat like this. This is how it renders, right, on a web page. But in the background, what we have here is actually an HTML code, right, that helps you render the web page or display the web page. HTML code has a formatting information. Okay, so now let's see what happens here. So we already did this. If I ran this code, right, you're basically going to see. Let me run this so we can see. This is something that we did before. Okay, only difference is the variable name is different. So it tells you that, again, I put other differences. I also typed in what type of variable is this. It tells me it's a class belonging to this, http.client.http response object. Okay, so this is what we saw before as well when we didn't have type. Okay, just to get a sense of what we're doing here. So I'm just going to comment this out. We don't need this. Okay, and if you want clarity, really we won't use this. I can even delete this. Okay, I just wanted to show this to you. And the other interesting thing that for us that would be useful for you to remember is for this package, for URLLib, you can think about this variable web page, right, as somewhat being similar to the file object we looked at when we talked about files. Remember, few classes ago we talked about files and how we handle files, and you can think of this as a file object, somewhat similar. Okay. So again, this again would mean that this variable does not give you the content, but provides you access to the content that's being pointed to by the link here. Okay. So again, if you remember your file, once you have the variable web page, right? Let me just make it X. Okay. So once you have the variable X, okay. And all I'm doing is, if you remember files, if I want to read the content of the file, I basically invoke the method called read, right? So I invoke the method called read on this variable X, right, which is an object, and I print this. Okay, guess what's going to happen? It's running. Hopefully you'll see the result in a minute. Bingo. So what you see is the HTML code that we saw before here. Okay. So you don't get the actual page. What you get is what you see here. When I did view page source, you saw the HTML code. This is what we get. It looks much nicer here, but in this code here, it's basically everything is bunched up together, but trust me, it's the same code that you saw before. Okay, so this gives us access to the content of whatever resources is being pointed to. Okay, I hope you understand that. And now this is one way of reading it. And again, you might also notice that there is this interesting prefix here called B, and then a quote, and then there's a end quote right here. Okay, so you see the end quote at the very end. So all this is telling you is that this is a byte string. It's a different kind of a string, that's all. From Python 3, it's called a byte string. Okay, and again, we don't need to know this for our class, but traditionally, if you don't have this, the way we've dealt with strings so far, you don't have these things. They happen to be Unicode. Okay, it's a different way of encoding characters. Okay, again, you don't need to know this for the exam. You don't need to know this for our class. But again, in general, it's useful for you to go back and maybe do a Google search later. Talk about. I'm just going to type this here. Okay, talk about. Let me type this here. Difference between Unicode and byte strings. Okay, so do a Google search later if you are more interested in this topic. Okay, for the time being, if it doesn't bother you that you have this B here and the quote, it shouldn't matter. It's the same thing. Okay, for our purposes. Now, and I'm also going to show you shortly how to remove this. Okay, in the next piece of code, if it bothers you. But again, for our class, I don't care. You don't have to worry about it. To me, this is the same, right, as if you don't have that, just two different types of strings. Okay, so let me comment this out. Okay, now we won't be able to print this out. Okay, and again, if you remember when we talked about files before, there's another way of accessing the content. Instead of printing the whole thing, and again, I warned you against it, especially in a file. I mean, we don't have to necessarily worry about it for a web page, but if it's a text file, if you don't know ahead of time how much content is in a page, you do not want to read or use this method to read everything at one shot, because it could really, impact your memory use. Okay. Another way of accessing the content, right, is again another variable. I'm just using this as a variable. If you want, you can put Y or A, B, C. I don't care, but you can access it line by line, right, using the file object. Again, in this case, it's a different class, of course, but I'm just using the term, file object as a shorthand. So I can say for line in web page, right, then print line. I mean, I can actually just do, I'm just going to remove this, okay, for the time being. I'll explain this in a second. Let me remove this, okay. Now, I can print this. This is what we did before in files. There you go. So again, you have slightly better formatted, okay, HTML code. Again, you see this kind of annoying B byte string, quote, open quote, close quote for every page. You also see this end of line, right? So you see some special characters. Again, doesn't matter for us, for our class. Okay, this is perfectly fine. What it does is that it allows you to open the web page, right, using an object, or rather the file object, and then you basically read the content, right, off the page or off the resource that you typed in. Okay, so now if you don't want those pesky B and the open quote, end quote, and all that, and even if you don't want, let's say, the end line, right, the new line statement at the very end, so you might want to do this. So again, if you remember this, R strip strips away the white spaces at the very end, right? So just strip something here. And as I mentioned, there are two different types of strings. If you don't want to use the byte string, all you need to do is .decode and convert this to a traditional, string, which is more useful. Python 3 UTF-8 is a encoding scheme. Again, I'm not going to talk about it for our class. If you are more interested in this, you should do a Google search. Okay, so I'm going to decode it into the regular things that we are typically used to. So let's see what happens here. It's running the code. Again, I'm waiting. Okay, I'm waiting. I can't do much now. Hopefully you will see something. Oh, actually it ran, but nothing happened. If you have a moment, stop here, pause the video for a second, and think about why that happened. And all I needed to do was change this to X, okay? And I actually went to a new cell. Let's say I insert new cell below, and then I did a reset, okay, to make this work again. Again, you remember this. So again, since you're working with Jupyter notebooks, you might want to do the reset once in a while. And especially if you're dealing with file object kind of situations, right? You want to be careful. If it goes to all the way to the end of file, for example, if you don't comment this out, try this after. If you run both of them at the same time, only one, the first one will print, the second one will not print because it's gone to the end of the line of the file. Okay, end of file. So it may not work for the second side. Okay, again, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, try running this and think about it. Okay, but for the time being, I've reset everything. So let's get back to the code. Let's run this and see what happens. Bingo. So we've gotten rid of that pesky the byte string, right? And so we cleaned up the end here, and also we decoded from byte string to the regular string that we used to, that uses this UTF-8 encoding. Okay, again, do a Google search if you really are curious about UTF-8, and I mentioned this very briefly in the very first module when we talked about character encoding, ASCII, Unicode, and so on. Okay, so hopefully this is clear, and again, this is something that should be familiar to you because all of this code, we've done this before in files. I mentioned this is similar to a file object. The only difference now is that we have a new package that we opened, right? And then we are using this command, URLOpen, this function, and we're providing an argument. That's basically a web page. Okay. So what I might want you to do is, again, maybe pause the video for the time being, right? For a quick second, and look at this. I do have a resource that's available to you, right? movies.shot.txt. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste this here. Okay. And you see that this is the file that we worked with a while ago when we did the files module. Okay. So movies-shot.txt available to you from this resource. As I mentioned, it does not have to be HTML. And because it's not a HTML file, this is the content, right? So there is no formatting, no rendering. This is the content. What you see here on this page is the content, right? So I'd encourage you to try to print this line by line. Okay. So use the same code. I'm going to go back here to the untitled, right? I'm just going to say copy this. Okay. Go to the next page. Go to the next cell. Or let me delete this. Edit, delete cells. Right. Okay. Pause at this pause at this point in time. What I want you to do is replace this, right? And think for a second what might happen, right? Again, comment this out. Now think about what might happen. So what is X going to be, and how would you read files? How would you read the content of the file? If you want to read it at one shot, how are you going to do it? If you want to read it line by line, how are you going to do it? Okay. Again, the short answer is, if you want to read everything at one shot, nothing changes. Again, you're reading files. Oops, there's a mistake here. I forgot to comment this out, so I'm just going to add a comment line here. Okay, so let me run this again. Bingo. So you have the content of the file, but again, the difference is it's a byte string. The output of this is a byte string, open quote, end quote. Okay, so this is what this gives me. Okay, so I do have the content of the text file. One way for me, again, it doesn't have to be a HTML file, right? It can be any other resource that's available to you across the network. In this case, because we're using URLLib, it's across the internet. Okay. Again, very useful library to have. So let's say that I don't want to read, right? I don't want to read the entire file like this. I want to have it look nice, like we did before. So then all I need to do is uncomment this, remove these things. Try running this and see what happens. So here you have the content of the file. Again, the only difference from before is that I changed the decoding. Okay. If it doesn't bother you, I can remove this, leave it as is. So you have the content. The only difference now is it's not Unicode. It's a different sort of encoding, byte string. Okay. And again, once you have this, now you can actually start writing code to process text files. You can actually download text files from places like if you, I think it's called Gutenberg, that makes available Gutenberg open source books, makes available textbooks. So you can actually try to process some of the text. You can download them. They make available text as some of these books as a text file. So you can try to download some of these books and try to do some processing using files. And again, see, this is, you don't have to know, all you needed to know, I mean, this is one project for you, for the final project. All you need to know is this, right, this command, and now you go back to your file processing. This is module 6 or 7. You go back to file processing and try to figure out how will I extract specific things from there. Okay, so all you need is file processing, some string functions, some lists, if you want dictionaries. Now you have yourself a project, a simple project, right, where you don't have to know anything else that we talk about beyond this point. Okay, here's an idea that I just gave you. All right, so we did some basic file processing in some ways, right? But we used this URLLib package, right? And one thing I want to do before I move on to the next stage is just show you these 2 lines of code. Again, you don't need to know this for the exam, right? Sometimes, I mean, if you want to know what's there in a URL, sometimes it's easy for you to just copy this, right? And you paste this, and you see the web page, and then you right click on Chrome, you view page source, and you can see the HTML file. Sometimes if you just want to see how a page looks like, all you might need to do is use this command from IPython display import HTML. This is for Jupyter notebooks, right? And you type in the URL, right? And you can specify the width and the height. Okay, and let's see what happens. So bingo, you actually have the page that's rendered to you inside of Jupyter notebooks. Okay, and I made this intentionally very small. So if you want to adjust the width, let's say I'm going to say 800. I'm going to make this 200. Run this again, shift enter, I'm sorry. You have the web page. I can make it slightly bigger if you want. So this way you get, you have a sense of how the web page looks like, as before you start processing the web pages. Okay, so just something that's useful to know. Okay, let's move on. So we used URLLib. Now before we leave, I just wanted to introduce you to another very useful package called Beautifulsoup. Okay, and I wanted to run some basic code, Python code, to see what we can do with this. Okay, as I mentioned, if the resource that you have here happens to be a text file like movies.short.txt or any of those Gutenberg open source textbooks, I mean, these are books like, Romeo and Juliet or something else, some of these other textbooks, other classic books, any of the Shakespeare books, any of the old books that you can process. You can use the knowledge that we've already, you can actually use the basics of what we've talked about so far, lists, strings, dictionaries, right, to do some interesting data preparation exercises as a project. Right, but let's say that you are more adventurous and you want to, work with the web page and you want to process the web page, then you would need an additional package. Okay, and that package is going to be Beautifulsoup. So here, what they've done for you is, let me see if I can copy and paste. Again, I'm just going to show you very quickly Beautifulsoup. So here's the web page, crummy.com. Okay. So this basically, they took this object, when you open this URLLib, right, you have an object, and the content of the object, as I talk to you, when you read the content of the object, it's going to be HTML tags, HTML page with lots and lots of tags. What this package does for you, Beautifulsoup, is someone's written the code for you to be able to process those tags much easier. Okay. So for example, if you want to just print a list of external, just any list of links that are on a web page. In this page, right, I'm going to quickly do a Control F. I mean, I know how many links, but let's say that I want to find out how many anchor tags. I mean, really, I have to type in A, but I'm just going to do ahref. Okay, how many of these? I can see here that there are two of those, right? 1 and 2. One is an external link and 2 is an internal link. Okay, so maybe one exercise, again, this is too simple to be a final project. One exercise might be, I want to basically list all of the links on a web page. Okay, so what Beautifulsoup allows you to do is they've already done the processing for you, and it makes it easy for you to look for different tags and access these tags. Okay, you can do some fun things. Okay, so let me close this. Let me move back here. Okay, I'm going to copy this. So again, this is basically, if you remember, this is what we've done so far, just an extension of what we're doing, another small extension. Okay, so let me paste this code here. Again, what we are going to do is what I just told you, right? Read a web page. In this case, we are going to be reading the page that we looked at before, the page I provided to you, right, that we just looked at. It has 2 links inside of it. What we want to do is just print these links, extract those links, extract those tags, and I just want the links to be printed. Okay, so for example, I'm going to copy and paste again. Command C. I closed it too soon. So I want to print, not only do I could actually print the whole thing, right? But the tag to tag, A starts here, it finishes here. So I could take the whole thing and print it, right? So here's the second one. A starts here, A finishes here. So that's one way, maybe I can list those 2 things, but I specifically want just the links, this link and this link. That's it, nothing else. Okay, so let's see if we can do that. So let me go back here. So the first few lines should be familiar, right? Not the first line, because now we need another package, right? So Beautifulsoup is the name of the library or package, right? And you get that from another package called BS4. Again, if you're using Python 2, this would be different. I think you probably say import Beautifulsoup. That's it, nothing else. But if you're using Python 3, you need this from BS4 import Beautifulsoup. Okay, something that you need to know. And as before, from URLLib.request, import URL open. Okay, now it could be X, HTML, whatever it is that you want. I'm not going to change it. Web page equal to, this is the URL I want to open, right? So I use the function URL open in quotes, the URL. All right, and again, this is something that we did before. It's going to be an object, right? We did this before, so I'm just going to delete this just to make things clearer. Okay, so the first few lines now we know. The new thing now is that now we are invoking this object, this beautiful thing called Beautifulsoup. So you take this variable that is somewhat similar to the file object that I mentioned before, right? You put it in there, okay? And again, this is something that you need to know. If you don't use it, it'll still run, but you'll see an error message, and you can read this yourself, but I'm going to leave it in there. So you're basically saying, I'm going to use this to parse the web page. Parse, P-A, I'm just going to type it in here, LXML, to parse the web page, right? Parse web page. All right. Okay, so now again, you need this. You need to remember this. There are other parsing libraries as well, and I'll show it to you as we go along. But this should work. This is very powerful. This should work for our class. Okay, so you need that object, file object, and you need this parser. Okay, and I invoke Beautifulsoup, which comes from here, right? And again, this is assigned to another variable. I can call it X, Y, Z, doesn't matter. I'm going to call it soup. So we know that it's actually a Beautifulsoup object. Okay. And again, if you maybe I'm going to copy this line and move this here. So what is the soup? If you're not sure, let's find out. When we run this, again, it's not necessary, but I'm just going to show you that, okay, soup, right? What type is it, right? And I guess I used to have before X here. We don't need this. I'm going to delete this. Okay. And this basically says at the end, print 2 enters or 2 new lines. Okay. And then I basically say x, right? I take a variable, I take soup, okay? This is an object. Now I'm basically saying find all, and again note that this A has to be capital A right here, okay? Find all of the A tags in the object. Again, if you remember, Beautifulsoup takes a HTML page and makes it easy for you to access the tags inside the HTML page. So all I'm doing here is I'm trying to access, okay, this particular tag A, which is ahref. If you remember this is the name of the tag, anchor tag A. Okay. So let me come back here to the untitled page here. Okay. Now I can try to print it. Okay. I'm just going to comment this out. So let's see what everything else is, what we've done so far. Okay. I'm just going to comment this out. So let me run this. So we've done the first few lines. Soup is a Beautifulsoup object, right? And then I want to find all the A tags, and I'm assigning this to an X, an object X, a variable X. Okay. Let me run this. So what you see here is it clearly shows you that soup, okay, I say print type of soup, there is a class belonging to Beautifulsoup. Okay, so it's a specific object. It's a kind of an object that allows us to manipulate or access the tags, okay, more easily than if you had to start from scratch and try to process the HTML tags ourselves. We don't want to do that. It's going to be too painful. Okay, and now the interesting part of the code is this. So find all A anchor tags, right? Assign this to X, print X. So again, I would like you to tell me what data type you think X is. Take a moment. If you want, pause the video, take a moment, look at this and tell me what data type you think X is. Hopefully you said list. You can see the opening of square bracket, closing of square bracket. You see the first element, you see the second element, second item, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So here's a list with two items in a list. Again, here's where the concepts that we've learned before are going to be quite useful. We're going to see strings, we're going to see lists, we're going to see dictionaries, right? Even though we may have packages like Beautifulsoup that makes it easy for us to process HTML, we still need to have knowledge of basic, right, data types that we've looked in the past, like strings, and slightly more advanced data types like lists and strings. Okay, so now if you know lists, if I were to ask you a question, can you please print me the first item in the list? You should know the code. Okay, again, think about it. How would you print just the first item in the list? Okay. Thankfully, I have the code already written out here. So hopefully now it should be more clear to you, right? The first item is the way I would access the first item here, the variable name, which is X, right? And the index, use the index. The first item is at index 0, okay? So again, I can use all of those list operations, slicing, indexing, right? All of those things. So this should give me just this item, okay? And I'm also curious, it's always good to see the first time, again, it's not necessary, but I want to see what type, right, is this tag. And remember, this is coming from Beautifulsoup. Something here. What is it? So let's find out. Let's run this, with this two lines uncommented. Running. There we go. So the first item is, right, I typed it in here and bingo. So we got what we needed, just the spot right here. The first item is this. Okay. Now what's the type? What is this type? It's actually a specific data type or specific type that belongs to Beautifulsoup. So we don't know what's inside, but we know it's something different. Okay. And again, we get this thanks to Beautifulsoup. So again, what it means for us is that now we can actually do even more things to process this item, right? Not only do we get this, if I want to extract the actual link, right? Because this is specific to the way crummy.com, that I showed you here, this software developer, because they wrote a class and an object, this is a specific type of object that we can manipulate to get this. So what I mean is I can apply another method or a function to get just this. Okay. So what code would I write? So here you have it. So I'm going to uncomment this. Okay. So let me first uncomment this. And also note that really, I mean, I'm going to leave this for clarity's sake, right? We do need, X is an interesting part of, it's a list of 2 ahref tags, right? But I'm going to comment this out. We don't really need this in the final output. I had this here just so that you can understand what X is, right? But we don't need this in the final analysis, okay? So let me actually remove this, okay? So we won't be distracted. So now what we have, let me make this a bit more clear, right? 2 packages, and we use URL open to open a web page, right? And immediately after that, whatever, in this case, the file handle, similar to a file object, right? I apply that file object to this particular method, Beautifulsoup, from a different package, right? I use LXML HTML parser. We don't need this. I'm going to remove this. Okay. Now I have a file object. Sorry, I have a Beautifulsoup object, right? Called soup. Can be X, Y, whatever you want. So I take that object, then I apply a function that belongs to Beautifulsoup object, right? Called find all. That's specific to this package, Beautifulsoup. Okay. And I say find all ahref tags, anchor tags. And again, I'm going to leave the print statement here just so that it's clear for us. This is one useful print statement. So that's assigned to a variable called X. It happens to be a list of all ahref tags, ahref things there. Okay. And now what I want to do is, as I noticed before, as I told you before, that each of these individual things in there, they happen to be a specific type of object called bs4.element.tag. Because that is the case, again, I write a for loop. This can be anything you want for A, B, C, whatever it is, but I call it anchor, right? So for anchor in X, so X is a list with 2 items. So for anchor in X, so it's going to run twice, right? One for each item. Okay. So for this first element in the list, print this element anchor, right? Which is actually the ahref here that belongs to the bs4.element.tag, right? I can apply another specific function on this, right? Called get href. So what it's going to do is it's going to scan here and it's going to give me just this link. So let's see what happens. So you have a list, 2 items, and when I run this for loop, I just get the links. Okay. And again, if I want to really clean up everything, I don't need this list. As long as you understand that when I use a find all A, right, I get a list of objects. I can remove this too. Okay. So now let me run this again. So you've basically written a code that gives you the list of links, right, on a web page. So again, I said clean up code to get rid of unnecessary print statements. We've done that. Again, all those print statements so that we can understand what's going on. So if you actually look at this, it's quite simple. Not a lot of lines, right? Import packages, create these objects, thanks to some of the developers who already done the hard work. Now manipulate the objects to get what we want. That's it. Quite simple. Okay. So now what I would like you to do is apply this, take this code, right? Copy and paste, Command C, Command V, right? Copy and paste this. And I'm going to give you a web page. Okay, this is a stats. This is a professor from Columbia University Statistics Department. Command C. I'm just going to go here. Okay. Maybe I'll leave this here. It's a different page, Command V. So here you see a page, right? Okay, if you want to view the source in Chrome, view page source. You can actually see the HTML code. Okay, and if you do a Command F or Control F, find Control F for Windows and Command F for Mac, and let's say I want to find ahref. So you have a couple of ahrefs, right? So I want you to do the same thing, print all the links on a web page. In this case, there's more than two, right? Some internal and some external. Okay. So if you go back here, think about what you need to change. Okay, if you want, pause, take a look at the code, pause the video, right? And think about what you need to change. All right. So if you thought about it, it's actually quite simple. All you need to do is copy this, replace the URL, right? Command V. So you got a new URL. I call web page. I parse. I take this file handle. First of all, I have the import statements. Nothing changes. The only thing I change is change the URL here, right? That happens to be somewhat similar to a file object. And then I assign this to this Beautifulsoup object, right? I make this an object that belongs to Beautifulsoup class, and same code. Find all A tags for anchor and X. Get those links. So let me run this. Then you should try to do this yourself. So you have the list of all the links. Okay. So I'm going to switch over here to the original Jupyter notebook, and I want to introduce you to another, a different package here. The package name is called request. Import request. Again, if you remember, it's the same syntax as if you did import math or import random. Just simply import request. And what it does really is it's a replacement, for a more powerful replacement for the URLLib, this package right here. Okay. So again, I'm going to do a Google search. Let me go here. Okay. Python request. Okay, I think I have the right page. So you can actually look at this more in detail later. There's a lot of information, more information than you need, right, about this particular package. Okay, but it's more powerful than URLLib in my opinion. Okay, but for our class, really, we're going to be doing similar things. So for example, okay, so literally going to be a repetition of what we've done so far with slight differences. Okay, but we still need to do it. It's useful to know this. Okay, so let me go up here. I'm going to remove everything else that we don't need. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this code that we cleaned up, right? Command C and post it here. So this way you understand that this looks like a lot of code. Really, it's not a lot. What we really need to do the same thing is this: insert cell below, I'm going to paste it. I'm going to say cleaned up code. So you have it. Okay, that's it. This is all we did. Okay, now we are going to try to do the same thing, right? We are still going to use Beautifulsoup, but instead of URLLib, we are going to try to use this new package called requests. Okay, so let me go to this page. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to reduce clutter. Okay, let me again Command X. Let me clear this. So again, you may notice a similar pattern, right? The page is the same one we did before, page.htm. Okay, and here, like there before, we used URL open, right? Here it's request.get. Okay, and you need this prefix here because of the way we write this. When you say import request, you may have to use a prefix. And if I go back to this particular previous thing here, if you did from URLLib, right, whatever it is, import URL open, right, you don't need this, right? If you just did URLLib, then maybe you need to do URLLib. If you just typed in import URLLib here, right? Instead of this line, then you will need to do here, you would actually need to say URLLib dot request dot URL open instead of just this. Okay, because we wrote the code slightly differently, we can skip this part. Okay, so you just said URL open here, but here we don't have the luxury. We basically import requests, so we need to say from this package use this function or use this method, right? And this takes an argument, some web resource, in this case is a HTML page. And what we need to do here is that we actually need to, once we get this object R, right, and we need to apply another method called text on this object R, and we end up getting something called, I assign it to a variable called C. You can call it any name you want. And if you want to know what this is, again, I have the code here. The value of R is R, and print the type C. What is the C? Okay. Now, of course, you also want to print C, but before you do that, let's try to print this and see what happens. So it basically says that R is something called a response. It's basically telling you whether the web page was retrieved successfully. It's something like a status code. Okay, so each of these packages might implement this differently. Okay, C on the other hand happens to be string object. It's a string data type. So when I applied the method text, C is string. So hopefully now you can guess what the output of C would be. Okay, so if it's a string, again, I can actually, if you remember, I can use slicing operation. So let me try to do that. I'm going to use a slicing operation. Okay, and it's going to print the first from the beginning up to, but not including 300 characters of the string, whatever that's inside the string. Okay, and I'm also going to uncomment this, print the variable C, right, belongs to data type, and then print the first few characters from C, which is a string data type. And we already know all this. I'm just gonna uncomment and get the output. Oops, missing parentheses and print somewhere. Line 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I need to actually leave the comment in here. I made a mistake, so let me run this again. There you go. So the output of this, right, is right here. Value of R is response 200, tells you everything is right, everything is going fine. Type C is a string, right? Again, the variable C belongs to the data type class string. These two print statements do the same thing, right? This tells you C is a string type. And this, on the other hand, actually gives you the content of the HTML page. Again, I don't grab the entire HTML page, right? Rather, I grabbed the first 300 characters, starting from 0 up to and not including 300, right, from the page. And again, this is much better formatted, by default. Okay, so again, this is a different package. Request does very similar things. Okay, and if you want to clean this up, I can remove all of this, right? And actually, I don't even need this. If you don't want to print C, if I just want to process it, I may not even need this. Okay, so it's that simple. All right, let me run this again. So you have the HTML content. I grab the content by typing in the URL, applying the method text onto R, the variable here, and that's a string object. Okay, now I can process this. Okay, so let me go back to this slide here, or to this notebook here. So we actually did, let me go down to requests, right? So we did this first half, so now I want to do the second half. Okay, so I'm going to copy the whole thing, go back to the next one, clear everything, put this in here. I just copied the code from the prior Jupyter notebooks. I wanted to show you how to use requests, right, to do the same thing we did before using URLLib. Okay, and as I pointed out before, all of these things are extraneous. We don't need it, right? I'm going to delete all those things. We import request package. We apply the method get, right? Put in this URL as an argument, and the output is assigned to a variable R. And to that variable, I need to apply the text method so that I can grab all the text, right, from the HTML file. So the output of C is going to be a string object that contains all of the HTML code. Okay, and again, if you want to print C, you can always do that. I'm not going to do it now. Okay, but if you want to do that, be my guest and go ahead. You're going to see a string that has all of the HTML code. Okay, now what we need to do is basically take this C, right, and put it as an argument here to the Beautifulsoup object. Again, one thing that I forgot to do here in the code, I have requests. I do want to have another line that says import. So I'm just going to put this here. Okay, and now take C, right, put it as an argument. I'm going to be using LXML as the same as a HTML parser here. Okay, and now everything else should be very similar, more or less similar to what we did before. So once we did this, once we have this, you have a soup object. Again, I can call it soup1, soup2, it doesn't matter, a variable, right? Once you create this object, okay, now everything else is the same as before. Okay, the code looks slightly different, it doesn't matter, but it's the same thing. So what I do here is I take the soup object, right, the variable. I apply the method find all of the anchor tags, okay, and that's going to be assigned to a variable called tags. If you think about it, the last time we did this, think about what data type you think tags is going to be. This variable. This should be a list that contains all of those anchor tags, right? Last time we did this, applied this operation to this URL, we basically got a list of 2 links or 2 anchor tags. Okay, and this is just a print statement that shows you that it's going to be a list. We can leave it in here, but I'm going to remove this. We don't really need it. Okay, and again, last time we did this, because it's a list, if I wanted the first item, you need to do a 0 so I can access the list. Maybe I'll just put this in here, just so you can see what we did, right? So print tags, access the first element, okay, in the tag. So I'm just going to comment this out just to show you that it's going to be very similar to what was there before. Okay, if you notice a list, that's tags containing 2 elements. Okay, and if you look at the type, this should be that element tag. This should be the parent object, right? And this should be another styled object that's the element tag. Okay, and the first item which is this print statement. I'm accessing the first item by applying an index 0, this one. Okay, so really we don't need these 2 things. Okay, I can remove them. Okay, now I have a for loop here for element in soup, right? Dot find all a. Oh, so I actually, the way I wrote this here, instead of, I could have written tags. I already have a variable called tags. I could have simply said tags here. So if I want to make it, if I want to reduce the number of statements, I don't need this, right? So this is the tags. I'm not creating the variable called tags. Instead, I just type this in directly here. So I'm writing a for loop for element in soup.findAll, right? And I'm saying, if I want the link, again, if you remember for the URLLib, if I want the link inside this, I need to use this. Okay. I just noticed an error because I was running this code before. I used a different variable name, but now since I'm using the variable name element here, right? It could be A, B, C, X, Y, Z, doesn't matter. For element and soup.findAll, right? I need to print the element. So I'm going to say print element, and I also want the element is obviously going to be. There are 2 elements in the list. This is the first element or first item, right? And I want the link, so I apply this method called to this variable, right, which is a Beautifulsoup object. I apply this method, again very similar to what we did when we used the URLLib and Beautifulsoup together, right? Get the ahref, get href, right? And if I run this, I was trying to troubleshoot. Again, I forgot to remove the comment. That was the reason why I got the error message, right? Let me try to run this again. So you have, when I run this, you have prints the element that happened to be in the list before, right? And another element. And then that's the first print statement. Second print statement simply grabs the link, okay? So again, this is really, I don't need this. You can delete the print statement, right? We run this. So I've somewhat done the same thing like as before. The only difference is I used the request package rather than URLLib. Okay, so very simple code, different package. So useful things to know. So I have one last example. I'm just going to, so the cleaned up code I'm going to copy and paste. So let me paste the cleaned up code on the Jupyter notebooks. It's still below. So you have the cleaned up code. Okay, and now one final exercise. What I want you to do is use the requests package, right? Now use the CIS website. So for CIS website, I'm asking you to actually find a different tag called the header tag, H2. Okay, again, if you looked at the HTML code, right, HTML video from before, you probably know what H2 is. It's a heading tag. So again, note that it's slightly different. I do a find all, yes, but instead of A, the anchor tag, I'm finding the heading, and specifically H2. It could be H1, H2, H3, it could be multiple headings, but I'm only looking for one type, H2. And I say print the tag, okay? So let me try running this. So it went to CIS web page, grabbed 3 of those. Okay, let's find the source. I have the view source here for the CIS web page, right? So I want to find H2 tags, and you notice that it says 6 here, but actually there are 3 H2 tags. So this is open tag, close tag, right? So every 2 times it occurs, it's one. This is one full H2 tag, opening and closing included. So you have 1, you have 2, right? And you have 3. So you have 3 heading tags, header 2 tags, H2 tags that are present on the CIS website. Okay. Now let me run this. So you do notice that it grabbed all of those 3 H2 tags. Okay. So I'm printing the individual elements. The way I wrote the code, instead of getting the list, I'm getting the individual elements in the list, right? If I assign this to a variable called x, and if I say print x, that's going to be a list with 3 items. Hopefully you understand that. If not, think about it. If I assign this to a variable x, and I said print x, that'll be a list with 3 items. Item number 1, item number 2, item number 3. Okay. So this now is a basic introduction to accessing information from the web. It could be an HTML page, it could be text file, it could be something else. So we looked at both HTML page and text files for this module. So what we've done so far, as it looks here, it is quite simple. So it's not going to be enough for a final project. Okay. So what we will do in part 2 of web scraping, right? The next module would be to try to look at some more advanced HTML parsing, HTML processing. Okay.